Hey everyone, I'm Chris Lesniak,
And I'm Rob Byer, and this is
the Debate Math Podcast.
Debating Mathy topics and Mathy pedagogy with Mathy people just like you.
Let's get into this month's debate. Well, hello, listeners, and welcome to our latest debate. I have a question for you. Have you heard of the science of math?
It's a movement in math education world, which, to quote their website, aims to rely on well-researched instructional strategies and research about how students learn in order to ensure that all students have equitable access to high-quality math instruction.
It sounds good. However, there has been some pushback to this movement. Critics question what and how research was quoted and argue about some finer points.
So this definitely sounded like a topic for the Debate Math podcast. To make sure that we can hear out both sides, we have four thoughtful educators here to debate the resolution, the science of math, and show us the way forward for student success.
And so here, arguing in favor of the science of math, we have two awesome guests. And first up is a longtime educator who was awarded the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers in 2019, a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, where her research interests include developing and testing interventions for students with mathematical difficulties, with a special emphasis on peer tutoring, word problem solving, mathematics writing, and the symbols and vocabulary within mathematics. It's Dr. Sarah Powell. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Rob. How are all of you?
Very good. Thanks for being here. And can you tell our listeners where you are and what your current role is?
Well, you did a really good job with that introduction. So yes, I am a professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And all of my research and teaching and everything that I do in schools really revolves around mathematics, particularly for students who struggle with mathematics. So we design interventions and see if they are important or efficacious. We do a lot of work with teachers. And then I do a lot of work with teacher professional development across the country and world.
Very good. And then arguing along with her is a former middle school math and science teacher in Pennsylvania who left the classroom to be a teaching and learning specialist at Delaware County Intermediate Unit, and then an ed consultant with the training arm of the Pennsylvania Bureau of Special Education. This educator has also worked for Age of Learning as a curriculum developer and Code.org as a facilitator and program manager for Eastern PA. He is also a lifelong fan of the Philadelphia Flyers. It's Jonathan Regino. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Chris and Rob.
Glad to have you here. Can you tell us where you are, what your current role is?
Yeah, I'm right outside Philadelphia, working for Inverted School District as a pre-K to 12 math supervisor.
Very good. Welcome. And now for both of you, the question we ask all of our guests is, when did math first become controversial to you? I'll start with you, Sarah.
That's a great question. I had to think back on this one. So I did my graduate studies at Vanderbilt University. And probably there I was working in a department of special education. And that was probably one of the first times that I realized that people in a different building had a different approach to the teaching of mathematics. So maybe it didn't become controversial, but that's when I first realized that there were different approaches to how we would support students in math, particularly students who struggle with math.
Very good. And Jonathan.
Going back to freshman year in high school, I was taking geometry at the time, and my teacher was AD, taught part-time and athletic director part of the time. And first day of class, he sat me between the two star football players and looked at me and said, make sure that they pass. And for me, I took that as I need to make sure they could play every Friday night. And I realized at that moment that the math class wasn't about my success, but about them playing.
Okay. Well, thank you both for that.
And we have a team of two awesome educators arguing against. First up is an international expert on how the brain learns and a co-author of the best-selling book, Brain-Based Learning, among many other publications. With over 25 years of experience in education, this educator bridges her knowledge of how the brain best learns with her experience of teaching math to create tangible strategies to support teachers and schools across the globe. She has helped create new schools, leads whole school reforms, delivers workshops, and speaks at conferences. She can be found at the park playing football with her three young boys. It's Liesl McConchy. Hey, Liesl, welcome back.
Hey. I'm so excited to be back here on the Debate Math podcast.
Can you remind our listeners where you are and what your current role is?
Yes, I am coming to you from San Diego, California, across the street from the beautiful park where we play football as a family very often. And yeah, my current role is I am currently working on a new book, and also I'm doing a lot of consulting, translating the learning sciences for teachers all over the world.
Great. Welcome back. Glad to have you. And arguing along with her is a former teacher who spent 9 years in K-12 education and 2 decades as a professional development provider. An educator for over 30 years, she is the author of the book, Women Who Count, Honoring African American Women Mathematicians, co-author of Engaging in Culturally Relevant Math Tasks, president of the Benjamin Banneker Association, is on the Education Advisory Board of MathKind, and she and her partner, who happens to be a former member of the R&B group, the OJs, presenting a math and music session to students and teachers, always a sold-out show. It's Dr. Shelley Jones. Welcome, Shelley.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. This is my first time with Debate Math. Like Rob said, I live in Connecticut. I think he said that. And we still have a little snow on the ground, but it's starting to melt. So I'm just glad to be here. I work a lot with pre-service teachers, especially math methods. I also teach a STEM course for grad students and a reflective practices in math course for grad students, and work on some grad students' thesis as well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, excellent. And now the question we ask all of our guests, when did math first become controversial to you? Lisa, we're going to start with you. Do you have another one?
I don't remember what I've shared before. So what I'm thinking of right now, what's coming to mind is those first few days and weeks and months of being a brand new teacher. This is over 25 years ago. And I was one of those people who decided really early on that I wanted to be a math teacher. It's first recorded when I was in third grade, that when I would grow up, I want to be a high school math teacher. So I had spent quite a while preparing for this career that I was so excited about. And it really didn't take that long for me to realize, after I finally got like my own classroom and there I was with my own students, to realize that not everyone has experienced math in the same way that I had experienced math. And not everyone felt the same way about math that I felt about math. And not everyone learned math the same way that I was able to learn math. And it really, it just like jolted my system and was a real disruption to the vision that I had held for so long. And it really forced me to make some pivots and to adjust and to learn some new things.
And Shelley?
First, I'm going to say ditto to Lizo's story, because, yeah, when you first start teaching math, you find out, what? You don't love math? That's the first thing. But what I want to talk about is when I became faculty and higher ed, and the math educators are in the math department, and so are the actuarials and the pure mathematicians. And I never know what's the right word to call anybody. But anyway, so I think that's when it became controversial, because I wasn't a math major in school, but I became a math teacher. And so being housed in the math department, it's this whole other thing about math research that I didn't know about, and just a little bit of tension with math and math ed. And, it's just one of those things. And so for me, that's controversial, because I just thought math was math. But as it turns out, there's all of these different aspects of math that, we sort of get categorized into, and sometimes have like stigmas as well.
Thank you all. And with that, let's get into the debate. We begin with opening statements from each of our speakers. You each have 2 minutes to present your arguments. And we're going to start with the side arguing that the science of math can show us the way forward for student success. Jonathan, you're up first, and your time begins now.
The heart of this debate is a fundamental question about how we approach math education in our schools and the pedagogical strategies that best serve our students' and diverse needs. Drawing from a wealth of research and educational insights, I stand in firm support of this resolution. Advocating for an instructional approach that is both systematic and explicit, my argument is anchored in 3 core warrants. Warrant number 1, the necessity of explicit instruction for building foundational skills. Across the nation, significant number of students are struggling to reach grade level proficiencies in math. This crisis highlights the critical need for explicit instruction, categorized by clear modeling, guided practice, and supportive feedback. To address the gaps in foundational math skills, this approach is not a step backwards towards rote memorization, but a balanced strategy that incorporates hands-on learning with manipulatives and ensures that students not only understand the mathematical concepts, but also how to apply them. Warn 2, the limitations of inquiry-based learning for novice learners. And while inquiry-based and exploratory learning methods have their merits, especially for students already proficient in math, they present a significant challenge for those who lack foundational skills. Research and classroom experience suggests that novice learners benefit most from explicit explanations and guided practice before being launched into an open-ended exploration. The sequence allows students to build a solid foundation of knowledge and skills, equipping them with tools necessary to engage in productive inquiry and problem solving at a later stage. And the third warrant, the critical role of practice and feedback in learning mathematics. The science of learning illuminates how crucial practice and feedback are for the development of mathematical proficiency. Mastery in math is not simply a byproduct of exposure to concepts, but requires deliberate practice and the opportunity to receive and act on feedback. In conclusion, the science of math education grounded in explicit instruction, strategic practice, and informed feedback offers a clear pathway to student success. By embracing these principles, we can address the diverse needs of our student population, ensuring that all learners have the opportunity to achieve their full potential in mathematics.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now we will hear from the side arguing against the science of math with Dr. Shelley Jones. You have 2 minutes, and your time begins now.
Unfortunately, I don't believe that the movement that calls itself the science of math can show us the way forward for student success. Over my 30 plus years in education, I've studied and learned how to teach K-12 students math and how to teach adults how to teach math. While the science of math claims might be applicable to individuals or small groups of students, the interventions and programs mentioned may not be appropriate as instruction for general ed, whole group classroom math settings. I don't believe there is any group who can definitively claim that there is only one best way to teach children math, such as explicit instruction should always be the first and foremost type of instruction, especially without giving voice to the many education researchers who have conducted decades worth of studies with millions of students, such as John Hattie and his colleagues, Deborah Ball, who conducted a National Science Foundation in-depth empirical study on teaching practice, and others such as Tom Carpenter, Ed Silver, and Doug Grouse, to name a few. The Quasar study, which was a major study on math that was omitted as well. The website states, it may be important to point out that it is common for rigorous, high-quality research on math assessment, instruction, and intervention to be published in special ed and psychology journals with studies that include a sampling of the general education population and produce findings that are most relevant to gen ed math instruction. I would argue that there is adequate math education research conducted with students in general ed beyond the studies listed on the website, which are mainly focused on learning disabilities. The website provides a definition of explicit instruction and says it's important because it has an exceptionally strong research base for students who experience difficulty with math, but may also be beneficial for teaching math to all students. I find this unacceptable. Maybe being beneficial is not good enough.
Thank you. And now we'll hear again from the side in favor of science of math with Dr. Sarah Powell. Sarah, you have 2 minutes and your time begins now.
Thanks. Yeah, so when I think about a science of math, I first think about science. And when I look up a definition of science that talks about that as a systematic study of something through experimentation and observation. And so just as people have really latched on to this idea of the science of reading, which particularly was designed to meet the needs of struggling readers, I do see that there is a science of math. And that really, if we think about science, that's the study of the teaching and learning of mathematics through experimentation and observation. And so the debates about the science of math come up basically around research. I see that what research means to people has differing meanings. And so different fields have different approaches to research. And then that causes problems because those different approaches to research lead to different sources of evidence. And so all of the conversations around the science of math are really around, well, what are your sources of evidence? And it's likely that those who aren't supportive of a quote science of math unquote just have different approaches to research that lead to different sources of evidence. So just as an example, when I think about medical science, the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, they suggest randomized control trials are gold standard for medical research when thinking about approaches to helping people. And therefore, the Institute of Education Sciences, one of the research arms of the U.S. Department of Ed, they also suggest that gold standard are randomized control trials. And so I buy into that, really wanting to use randomized studies to understand whether one approach or one intervention is better or worse than another. But then not everyone agrees on that approach to research. And so it goes back to the idea of what is your research, which leads to what is your evidence, and then that research and evidence can inform a science of math.
Thank you, Sarah. And finally, arguing again against the resolution, the science and math can show us the way forward to student success. We have Liesl McConchie. Liesl, your time begins now.
Hi, I believe the controversy around the movement that calls itself the science of math expands beyond how we define research. It is my warrant that the movement that calls itself the science of math ignores the most significant variable in the equation of teaching and learning, and that's the student. Here are just two of the major scientific principles excluded from the movement calling itself the science of math that make it a poor model for teaching and lacking in scientific support. The first one is the learner's affective relationship with math. A student's affective or emotional relationship with math is foundational to their cognitive relationship with math. And I searched every web page connected with the movement called the science of math, and I searched for words like emotion, emotional, affect, affective, feeling. And I only found 2 uses of any of those words in the entire website web, and they both were used in a negative context. By ignoring students' affective relationship with math, the movement that calls itself the science of math leaves room for promoting practices like timed math tests that often negatively impact students' relationship with math and can ultimately impair their learning. It seems like all humanity is erased from this movement called the science of math, and students are positioned as machines with the ultimate goal of acquiring the most content and knowledge possible, regardless of any emotional cost. The second warning is that the learner's perception of relevance of the material seems to be missing. The website for the science of math has a rubric to evaluate your math curriculum for its inclusion of evidence-based principles, and nowhere on that rubric does it mention the use of math tasks that are highly relevant to students or math tasks that are culturally responsive tasks so students can see themselves in the math. Now, relevance is one of the brain's inherent motivators. When students perceive math as being relevant to them, it activates the attentional systems of the brain, the motivational systems of the brain. And yet the movement that calls itself the science of math excludes this essential principle of effective instructional design. So it is my belief that the movement calling themselves the science of math is an antiquated and misleading approach to teaching, trying to make a resurgence in the 21st century.
Thank you all for that. We have a fiery start to this. And so we want to really dig in here in our questioning round. And I want to start, Sarah and Jonathan. So I hear the other side saying like the movement that calls itself the science of math. So can we talk about just the title? Like, where does it come from? Are you a big fan of that, or is it just something that could be changed or something? Like that title by itself, like what does that bring out to you?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, Chris. I see that so much of this is born out of the science of reading movement, which people love or don't love. But the idea there is that there across the United States are a lot of students who struggle with reading. In fact, it's the majority of students in the United States. And we see the same thing in mathematics. I think what did the NAEP tell us in 2022 that 64% of grade 4 students did not meet a minimum level of proficiency. And so that's showing us that, this is not a special education effort or a general education effort, but this is really for all students. And if the majority of students in the United States are experiencing some level of difficulty with mathematics and not meeting a minimum level of proficiency, which is also usually very minimal, then we need to do something about that. And so I think that just latching on to that science of reading, it makes sense to have an analogous effort called the science of, and I believe that's where that came from.
Was the science of reading, just out of my own curiosity, as controversial as the science of math has been?
Oh, 100%.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, you've
So in
got
both
to,
realms?
oh, for sure. There's, these whole ideas of peoples in camps, which I really see as a total false dichotomy. I mean, there's a time and place for everything in reading instruction, just as there is in math instruction. But when we're thinking about students who really need help with that foundational content, there are some approaches to the teaching of that content that have been shown to be really important for those students. And that's where, so anytime you think about the science of reading, there's a direct analogy for the science of math.
Okay, and then we go to the other side then. So their argument sounds like they want all students to have high quality math instruction. We really want to help students with, the struggling students, the low scores that are happening. And so is it not important to listen to their research, or what are your thoughts on what they're saying?
I'm a little bit confused because I feel like I'm hearing two different things from both parties on the other side. Is that I heard Jonathan talk about how the need is like this 3-step process of like explicit instruction, guided practice, and feedback. And then I heard Sarah talking about what in the comparison to the science of reading, how there's the time and place for a variety of instruction. So I'm just wondering if one or both of you maybe could like clarify that, because it seems a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's the time and place is, are we working on foundational content, or are students engaged in more higher level content and more transfer? I think that that's where I could see that more inquiry could come into place there. But we really can't do that if students don't have a strong foundation, and whether it's counting or fractions or geometry or whatever it might be. But I'll let Jonathan add to that because he may have some ideas that are different than mine.
So I see it as a mode A and a mode B teacher. So Tom Sherrington in his book, The Learning Rainforest, kind of mentioned this idea that, we do need that inquiry piece. We do need that, that ability to dig into really deep into problems, but it's the order, I think, that really is divided when it comes to science and math, where I think I take the stance that we need to focus on the basics first and then go into the inquiry. And I think the flip side, a lot of people who are in that inquiry movement want the inquiry first. And then when the kids hit the roadblock, then go into the details of the foundational skills.
So just to clarify, the position of the science of math is that inquiry learning cannot facilitate learning effectively, that it needs to come after explicit instruction and foundational skills are built. That's what I'm hearing. Is that the position, science of math?
I can't speak for everybody in it, but being in a school district, what I'm finding is that if the kids, we go back to the brain science piece, and a novice learner, a beginner, is characterizing things by, weak links. They're looking at things that are individual pieces of a puzzle, whereas expert learners are looking at schemas and they're looking at all the connections when they're tackling a problem. So if you start with that inquiry piece, you don't have all those connections. And that slow process of trying to figure out things, that can happen. But if a kid starts to struggle, you run into that opportunity where, they might have that negative impact and have that negative feeling coming at that. Whereas if you start with the basics, you kind of prevent some of those roadblocks from happening at the beginning.
So just to clarify, the science of math, the movement that calls itself the science of math, positions explicit instruction must precede inquiry-based learning.
I would suggest that it's really for which students are we talking about, right? And really, I see that the science of math is trying to help all learners be successful with math, particularly students who are experiencing that difficulty. And just as I think about when I learn something new, how do I learn that thing? Like if I'm learning to play an instrument or to bake bread or just really anything, typically there's a model. I watch a YouTube video and then I have to do a lot of practice and I get feedback on that. That's helping me just pick out the notes on my, my bass that I'm learning to play. But then later on, I can start to construct my own songs and go beyond that. But as a novice learner, as a struggling learner, the research really does show us that modeling and practice is really important for that foundational skill. And then you can go on and apply that foundational skill.
So I agree with that, like procedural learning. Well, then math isn't a strictly procedural subject, but I just want to get really clear because there's a lot of questions about these. I want this, this isn't just about the 6 of us here. It's about clarifying things for the greater audience and our listeners here. Is that is it like, do not believe that you could hand a student a piece of patty paper or a triangle that's cut out of construction paper and have them like fold it to find the midpoints of two sides and have them like connect those midpoints and like do some measurements and learn something. But they have to be explicitly taught it first.
Well, I think that they're going to have a lot of background knowledge to be able to do that task that you're asking them to do. So to understand about folding and triangling and what does it mean to have something in half, right? Like we want to make sure that students have that background knowledge there in order to be able to engage successfully in that task.
Sorry, I just feel like, I mean, that's something that you would learn in like a 9th grade geometry class, like the one that Jonathan was alluding to. And I think that like folding a piece of paper in half is definitely a skill that a 9th grader would have.
Can I jump in? I want to bring Shelly in the conversation so she doesn't feel left out here. I just want to add, so I'm hearing a big distinction of like whether inquiry can come first or later, or like what the order is. So can you weigh in on that a little bit, Shelly, or your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the reason why you're hearing that is because on the website and in some of the one pagers, it's very clear that the people who follow and advocate for the science of math movement believe that, the explicit instruction has to come first. But we have other organizations like NCTM that talks about productive struggle and talks about procedural and conceptual being done together, right? Because if students learn a procedure without understanding the concept, many times they just learn how to mimic a procedure or how to just follow instructions. But we find that they're really not understanding why they did some of those things. And so to Liesel's point, I think, and I do it all the time, especially with college students who have never had the opportunity to do it. I have them play with things, but I orchestrate, what I'm going to have them explore. So I have them explore some things. I ask them to do something. And from that, we reflect on, well, what do you think? What did you find? I know that elementary students are capable of doing that as well. And so I know that you can have students explore before you explicitly show them how to do something. So I don't think that there always has to be 100%. And that's where I feel that, there's a little mistake there, that you're advocating that always has to be this way. And we can't say always when we're talking about kids. We just can't, because all kids are different. And I always hear that qualification of students who are struggling. And so if you were only talking about students who are struggling, it may not always transfer to the general population. So I don't know if that's true. I don't believe that that's true. One last point is that the reason why we're having a problem with calling yourself the science of math is that you're leaving out decades of research that we know about. We're steeped in it. And you're leaving out this research to say that it basically doesn't matter, right? And there are different kinds of research. There's qualitative, there's quantitative. So there's not only randomized studies, which is very difficult to do with children because they're human beings. It's not the same as health. So let me just say this. So on the website, there's 4 articles that are from EdSite. 1 from psychology, 2 from elementary school journal, 1 from behavioral ed, 1 from AERA, 2 from learning disabilities, 1 from special education, 1 from psychological assessment, and only 1 from the Journal of Research on Math Ed, which is the premier journal for research on math ed. And so that's where it becomes problematic, is if you're going to call yourself the science of math, I just feel like there's not enough acknowledgement to what math actually brings to the table.
I do want to change topics here, but I do want to give Sarah one chance just to respond to some of those comments that were just made.
Well, I think that it has to be really interdisciplinary. And I was able to participate in a meeting kind of about the science of math debate with a bunch of cognitive psychologists and math educators and people like myself who, hang their hat in both special ed and math education. And so that, that literature traverses journals. And I think that some of those journals are, even though they seem like they're a psychology journal, a lot of math people publish in there. So, there might be one journal which represents some of the best of math ed. And I think it's an opportunity for math ed people to come together and say, all right, well, here's the research that we are supporting, and here are some of the evidence bases that are coming from that. And we think that this contributes to the science of math. So I would say anyone's welcome at the table, and let's bring the research and talk through it. Because when I went to that meeting in the I guess it was now in the fall, there was some really amazing conversations across disciplines about how we need to not look within the silo that we're all in, but at all of these other different resources. So I'm glad you bring that up, Shelley.
All right, I want to pivot a little bit because I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we've researched, some of the topics that people are discussing, and the ones around algorithms. And I'm actually going to start with Lisa and Shelley. Can we still teach algorithms? Where do algorithms fit in terms of math education? And just your thoughts about algorithms, and then I'll come over to the other side and kind of talk about that as well. But go ahead, Lisa and Shelley, one of you can respond about, can we still teach algorithms?
So one of the one pagers on the website talks about a misconception, and they say that many educators believe that algorithms promote memorization, and the teaching of an algorithm would contribute to a superficial understanding. And this belief leads to the idea that students should not be taught algorithms, right? And their truth is that they say an algorithm is a step-by-step procedure for solving a problem and is generally the most reliable and efficient way to solve a problem. And I don't need to read all of it, but what I want to say is that one of the things that I'm struggling with is these sort of absolute statements, right? Because students are so different. And yes, we both agree, the Science of Math Advocate and NCTM and myself, math educators, we all agree that algorithms are okay to learn, but not just algorithms for the sake of algorithms to just get an answer, keep, change, flip. But why do you do that? What does it mean, and how do you connect it? And I remember watching one of the videos, and someone was talking about how, when you use manipulatives, it's sort of like you're just doing a procedure or blah, blah, blah. But I said, well, no, I beg to differ, because when I have students use manipulatives or use drawings, I actually have them connect the algorithm to the drawing or to the manipulative, because when they make connections, they're learning better, right? Because they're able to explain the why. And so I think we both agree that algorithms are okay to learn. So when I read some of these misconceptions, I'm wondering, with all the research that you're talking about, I never got a sense of, when it says many educators believe that algorithms, blah, blah, blah. Well, who are many educators? Who is saying that? Because I know that we're not saying that.
Okay, so do you want to add anything to that before I go to the other side?
I don't think so.
Okay. And Sarah and Jonathan, how are algorithms helpful? And then if you want to respond to anything Shelley said as well, feel free to do so. So either Sarah or Jonathan.
I agree with much of what you said. I do believe in starting with the manipulatives and getting to explore the manipulatives and trying to understand how those pieces fit together. I think there is a difference between our version of explore and then the inquiry that we've been talking about. If we take that CRA method and exploring with manipulatives first, and then moving towards that algorithm, and so the students pick up the conceptual and the procedural at the same time, I think that's beneficial. I think there is a definitely somebody mainstream that talks about algorithms being an area to avoid, and focusing on kids learning strategies and models, and using algorithms as a stopping point from thinking. And I think that's where a lot of that discussion comes from.
So was the Science of Math, the movement that called this type of assignment, did that evolve as a way to push back against a single person that you're referring to? Or I'm not sure why I'm uncertain why we're talking about a single person.
I mean, I've also heard this comment in schools. I do a lot of work with teachers across grades 3 through 8. And while it's not specific to algorithms, I've had quite a few teachers tell me that they've been told they're not allowed to practice facts in the classroom. And, I think all of this is just messaging that get like a bad game of telephone. And I'm like, no, you're allowed to practice facts. And they feel relieved because like we work with a lot of middle school teachers and almost all of them say my students still don't know their multiplication facts and it causes problems in so many areas of mathematics. And I'm like, there's a lot of ways we can practice multiplication facts. Let's talk about some of those, right? And then I think that that fact conversation transfers over to algorithms where people have said, like, been kind of said, like, you do have to focus more on the meaning. And maybe sometimes they've gone to a PD where it said, hey, don't focus as much on these procedures. Whereas I agree, with Shelley, where it's like this has to be this combination of conceptual and procedural learning. Those develop in tandem. You really cannot separate one from the other. But sometimes I feel that there are, messages on social media and things that happen in PD where teachers, and maybe, wrongly so, interpret it as like, oh, I'm not allowed to just practice the algorithm, when really you're almost always practicing the algorithm with some of those conceptual pieces built in.
Can I follow up with that? Just thinking about practice, time tests, fluency, kind of in that realm. I mean, start with Shelley and Lisa. Like, what does that look like to you, ideally? And then I'll hear from the other side.
I think there is an agreement that students need to develop fluency with their basic math facts, and where there might be disagreement as to what is the best or most efficient way to do that. And when you take a look at a comprehensive swath of research in education and math education, and really center the student, the learner in that experience, then you realize what are some of the more efficient and effective ways to help build that fluency. And that, of course, would be through things like social learning, through joyful learning, which often involves games that build that fluency. And it's going to take time and it's going to take practice, but there's ways to put in those reps to build that fluency that actually builds a student's math identity instead of breaking it down.
I just want to follow up with something. So there's this thing with, you got research, you got PD people, you got teachers, right? And there's this thing where when you make things absolute, teachers think they have to do it, right? And I'm going to say it again. That's where I have a problem with some of the stuff on the website, right? So there are some things that we agree on, and but it's just sometimes it's just the way it's said, right? Incorrect messaging, like CRA, concrete representation, abstract. I teach my pre-service teachers that because they're going to be elementary school teachers, and I think that's great for early childhood and sometimes even for upper elementary. But I think sometimes the Launch Explore Congress is also great for students for older students. And so when you say CRA is the only way, that's where I have a problem, because it's a great way. It's great to start with concrete, even with middle schoolers, but not always. It depends on the content that you're teaching. Some things are better exploring first. I love exploring with fraction tiles and color tiles, little square tiles, for students to understand common denominator and equivalent fractions before we talk about, multiplying the numerator and multiplying the denominator, because they figure that out just from playing around with it. And so that's why I think just saying that it can only be this way, I think that is problematic, because there are some content that is better using Launch, like pi, taking out a piece of string and measuring around and measuring the diameter, right? And then just having them divide that and then having them talk about it. So I think that you don't leave room for that with the language that's on the website.
And also when you say things like what Shelley read earlier, like algorithms are the most efficient way. And when you take a look at like time constraints, if you're centering your clock and that is the most important piece in your pedagogical decisions in terms of being efficient, then sure, teaching an algorithm could be argued to be the most efficient for time. But when we center the student in all of our decision-making processes, especially our pedagogical decisions, then we realize that teaching an algorithm isn't always the most efficient way to teach students, because there are implications to that expand days and weeks and months and years beyond, the few minutes that you saved by teaching directly to an algorithm first and foremost. Because if you're missing some of that exploring or that conceptual understanding that will be supporting them for years and years to come, when they are struggling later on because they don't remember, oh, wait, shoot, hold on. Is this when I'm supposed to flip, switch, flip, divide, no, turn, twist, do a cartwheel? I forget what's the algorithm for this because they missed out on a few minutes of that conceptual understanding. So my hope for those who are listening, that as we make instructional decisions for our students, that we always center our students in all of our decisions. And other factors like time and efficiency and tests and scores, that those become secondary considerations, but we really put the student in the center, which brings us to questions of well, what do they already know? Who is this student? What do they bring to the table? What content knowledge do they already have? Where are their gaps? And that's how we can make the best decision for the individual students that we're working with.
So let me go the other side with the same question. Just so with science of math, what does practice and time tests and fluency look like in your mind? And how absolute is it? Like Shelley was asking, and so what is your view of those things?
Oh, that's a great question, Chris. And I think it really depends upon what you're trying to do, right? So we'll go back to facts. We'll start there. So, if you're looking at fact accuracy, you really can only measure accuracy through untimed assessments. But then if you're looking at fact efficiency, like how quickly can you recall these facts, then that is really helpful to do under a timed setting. And really, it's typically a combination of accuracy and efficiency that is important for fact recall. And so there might be activities where you don't do a timed activity, and then maybe once a week or once every other week, you do a timed activity. We do a timed activity in one of our interventions that students wouldn't even know is timed because we're timing it, but they don't know when the time ends. And we just mark at the end of 1 minute, but then students continue. So you actually can measure both efficiency and accuracy with the same activity. And so thinking about that, that's a totally fine activity to do. And then we get both of those information, those resources in terms of our information. But I'll turn it over to Jonathan, who might have something to add to that.
I don't know. I think that when we're talking about fluency, I did do to the PD side for a while and was working across the state. And when you start to hit schools, what are the three major things that pop up? And no matter what grade level you were working with, it was always basic facts, word problems, and fractions. Doesn't matter what grade level, it's that was the common theme. So thinking about from a school perspective, how are we going to fix that issue? That's where it started moving towards that science and math and looked for ways to fix that. If that's the common issue, and it's been that common issue for years and years and years, what's the way that we can fix that as quickly as possible? You have the Greater Texas Foundation did a meta-analysis that showed how well a kid was doing at the very beginning of school was pretty much how they were going to do towards the end of school. You have the Carter Foundation who did the same thing, and they looked at North Carolina, Massachusetts, and Washington data that showed by the end of third grade, that was essentially how they were going to do by the end of eighth grade. You have research from the NAEP test. You have just over and over again, it's showing that if our kids start to struggle and before third grade, they just continue to struggle. And no matter what side of this debate you end up on, it's what are we going to do to make sure that a third grader, by the time they finish third grade, that isn't their end sentence for the rest of your life. I personally have a daughter in third grade, and I can't imagine kneeling down in front of her at the end of the school year and saying, look, you struggled. You're always going to struggle for the rest of your life. And so no matter what side I'm on, I want that answer of how can I make sure that none of their students fall into these categories of you're here, you're always going to be here.
Yeah, I agree, Jonathan. The mathematical pathways are very strong, as you indicated. And so for me, and I think this is what you're getting at, it's like time is of the essence, right? And so it's like, I don't want to waste students' time any more than we already have. You know, if we see third graders who are struggling with first grade math, we've got to do something about that. We have middle schoolers who are still struggling with addition and subtraction and early place value. And like we have to be efficient with how we help those students because that pathway is continuing for them. And if we don't intervene and help out using what I would consider evidence-based practices, we're doing really educational malpractice.
I want to jump in because as we talk a little bit more about time tests, um, I think, and you called it out on the website too, and going to Sarah and Jonathan first about this idea of math anxiety and seeing the math, like what time tests that many believe do to students in terms of promoting math anxiety or developing math anxiety within students. Could you speak to anything that you have with time tests, and does it cause math anxiety? And I'm going to give it to Sarah and John.
Well, to date, there's not a research study that shows that math anxiety is caused by time tests or that time tests cause math anxiety. There are anecdotal stories about people going back to remembering maybe they were doing a mad minute and that caused a lot of frustration for them. But I think the interesting point that I always think about as a person who struggled with math in middle school, I do not blame that on time tests being like the cause of that. But I am pretty cognizant that the other 49 or 60 minutes of math instruction that was not great likely contributed to my math anxiety. And so we all want to find the one thing that causes, something else. Like we want to figure out what causes cancer or what causes math anxiety, but it's often probably a dozen or 100 things and things that have happened to you 3 years ago that you may not even realize are impacting your fourth grade math now, right? So until somebody actually does a study about this that points out that causation, some people will believe that that connection is tenable, but there's likely a lot of factors that are causing math anxiety, not just one thing. And that one thing is not time test.
I think there's a lot of words, some things that were just said, like some really concerning things that were just said. So if I could summarize, and people correct me if I got anything wrong, I've heard representatives from the movement that calls themselves the science of math say like there's no research showing that time math tests can lead to math anxiety. And then a statement was made like there's anecdotal evidence. So first of all, I'd like
I think
to
it's
point
like
out,
causing math anxiety. It's causation. That's the thing that's at an issue.
so I'd like to point out that there is a limited view of what is considered valid research. Now, I believe that people's stories, I believe people and I believe in people and I believe their stories. And when they share their stories time and time again, like thousands upon millions of people who are communicating this, I consider that to be valid research. That is data that needs to be listened to, even if it doesn't fit into a very small, narrow, like perspective of what some people might consider to be research. I also would like to point out that what I heard was like some projection happening from someone's own experience, like just because you didn't consider it to be anxiety inducing, like it sounded like you're projecting that because that wasn't your experience, that doesn't mean it couldn't be someone else's experience. And I find that to be really problematic.
So there's two things. One is the way fluency is defined, accuracy and speed. When we talk about time tests and speed, so that was great what Sarah said about the students don't even know they're being timed. That's great. But that's not usually the case. When they're doing Mad Minute or they're doing these time tests, they know. And I have pre-service teachers that are going to be elementary teachers, and I have a bunch. I'm not going to read them because there's way too many, but I have a bunch of anecdotal stories here. And out of 15 students, only one was math is her favorite subject. But even that one talked about how, you know, making mistakes on the test because being anxious about the time. So I just believe that time tests affects a lot of students. And that's anecdotal. Now, I've been doing this math anxiety thing for probably 10, 15 years. And so I really need to go back and maybe I'm the one to do some of this research. It wouldn't be randomized because they would be my students, but I could read off and I printed it off because of that, but I can't read because it would take too long. Every single student basically had a problem with time tests and math anxiety. And so when we talk about being fluent in something, I don't know if it's just accuracy and speed, you know. I think when we put speed in it, and I know that I understand that you're saying the speed comes after. I understand that it's not at the very beginning. So I understand that there's these stages. But I just think that students will begin to know because they're pretty smart what's important. If the answer is what's important, that's what they want to know. Miss, is this right? Miss, is that right? That's all they want to know. They don't want to understand it. They just want to know, is it right? And so I think that it's a danger to having that as a goal, accuracy and speed. It's because I'm slow.
I just have two follow-up questions. Like one, like Sarah, you talked about like accuracy and efficiency, which I think we all agree are two wonderful goals. But my question to you is, can you share with the audience who's listening to this recording, what are some other ways to build efficiency that don't revolve around time?
Well, I think it's all practice, right? So all of mathematics is learned through practice. And so the more that you practice, the more likely you are becoming accurate, and the efficiency builds with that accuracy. So as you were talking about earlier,
Then why not build practice in without the added stressor? Like life is stressful enough for so many kids right now. Why do we need to add that extra pressure of stress?
I mean, in most of the class, I mean, we're working with well over 100 teachers here in the Central Texas area, and we're doing observations and we're doing coaching with those teachers. And we are running into very little times where teachers are actually doing timed activities. They're doing a lot of games, as you were talking about, lots of different activities, dice roll, playing cards. They're doing flashcards. You can do those untimed. I mean, there's just like so many things that teachers are doing. And by doing that daily practice, that is helping students not only with their accuracy, but with their efficiency. And so I would suggest that those are some of the ways that they could do that.
I love all those ideas, and I'm a big fan of all of those. So my question then is, why does the website that claims to promote the science of math not share those things, not share those ideas, but instead list as a misconception that time tests cause anxiety?
Well, I would say that the time test cause math anxiety is something that's talked about a lot on social media. And probably, I mean, it seems like all of us do a lot of work with teachers and districts. It's something that comes up, I would say, over half the time I'm working with a group of teachers, like asking that question. And so while I can't speak for a website or people that put together a website, I would suggest that maybe like what we should all do is put together a lot of these different fluency activities, make them easily available to teachers so that they know that they have like dozens, if not hundreds of different activities at their fingertips that can help with this idea of not just fact accuracy and fact efficiency, but then later on computational fluency as well.
That'd be wonderful. Like, but as someone, like, you're here as like a representative of the movement that calls itself the science of math. So I'm assuming that like you're a part of that website.
I have seen the website, but I did not write any of the things that you're talking about. So, but I'm here as a person who's saying that there is a science to the teaching and learning of math. And the science of math is not a website. The science of math, as I think it's described, is a movement to get people talking about evidence-based practices. And if that's what we agree that the science of math is, we did it. We're doing it here tonight. We're talking about evidence-based practices and math and what those are. And that information needs to get into the hands not only of principals and teachers, but also caregivers, not just here in the United States, but I would say across the world.
Yeah, I'm going to pause you both there. And I think that will conclude our questioning round.
No.
We will now end by giving each side 2 minutes to make their final arguments to you.
And we will begin with Jonathan. Jonathan, your time starts.
So I want to start off by saying the Science of Math is not a website. It's the idea of bringing evidence-based practices to everyone. So when a teacher's in the classroom trying to figure out what the next step is, they have a playbook or a way to make good informed decisions. We're in this current environment where schools are really ill-equipped to intervene when students leave the trajectory and the progressions that they're supposed to be on. We also have limited amount of time. Most of our state tests happen right after spring break when we still have a quarter of the school year left. So using that time to actually help students and to make progress is really, really important. Our time is limited and we need to have the best decision-making pathways to help our students out. We don't really want to focus on the false dichotomies of ideas. I think a lot of times we are coming down to the meaning of a single word, and that is helping us deviate from what actually works and what doesn't work. I think through our arguments today, we've found a lot of common ground, and it's just one or two words that really throw us off from agreeing completely. And in closing, I think the best approach to mathematics education is really complex and multifaceted, and you need a little bit of inquiry, you need a little bit of exploration, you need a little bit of explicit and direct teaching. But in the end, the whole point is to help our students understand and succeed in math. And, we have a lot of ground to make up, especially since the pandemic. And hopefully using the Science of Math leads us to a quicker closing of that gap.
Thank you. And with the final word, we have Liesl and Shelley.
Hi, we don't believe that we need to cave to the pressures of a poorly designed education system or a school year that has state testing at a certain time. That when we truly place the student at the center of all of our decision making, then we can really serve them and help them learn, which is what we are here to do. 25 years of studying the science of how we learn math leads me to confidently say there is no one right way to teach math. Any pedagogical approach that's elevated as the way ignores the student's identity and thus is flawed from the start. I mean, think about it. Imagine a teacher who is starting off a new school year, walking into a classroom with 30 unknown learners and having the audacity to say, I know the right way to teach these students math, without knowing who they are, where they come from, their culture, what they care about, what they know about, how they feel about math, how they see themselves with math. These are all foundational to a student's identity that determines how well that student will learn math. And many of these principles are excluded from a movement that calls itself the science of math. So we invite all who are listening to understand that there are complexities to things that are part of this movement called the science of math, that the sweeping statements made about productive struggle, about cognitive load, about timed math tests, are far more complex and nuanced than is being presented. We call on all folks who are associated with the movement called the science of math to join math leaders in education, working to create a humane and comprehensive approach to learning. The learning sciences have advanced and expanded, and we invite you to expand your understanding of what matters for student learning in a school-based context.
I wanted to add that although this is a movement, the website is where people will go to learn about this movement. And on the movement, on the website, it says there's a truth that productive struggle does not deepen understanding. And the NCTM has productive struggle as one of the 8 math teaching practices with loads of research. So if you want to look for that, you can do that. And the other thing, John Hattie, in his meta-analysis, there were 1,200 meta-analysis that he ran. Dialogic instruction, which is close to discovery instruction, had a higher effect size of 0.82 than direct instruction, which is close to explicit instruction, which had an effect size of 0.59. It means that both of these ways of teaching instructional strategies will help students. So it does say that, but it doesn't say that one has to happen before the other. And so there's not a dichotomy. I think that there's both ways that we need to look at, and we need to, I think the language might need to be cleared up a little bit, because there's just seems to be some things that are too absolute. And like Liesl said, there's not just one way of doing any of this teaching practice.
Thank you all. And that concludes this great debate. Wow, you've given us so much to think about. I've learned a lot, and I hope this gives lots of folks out there some good food for thought.
Now it's up to our listeners to take a moment, ponder the arguments. If you're like me, you're probably going to have to go back and listen to this a few times. There's so much information that I want to continue the conversation. So I encourage you to continue the conversation with others who have listened to this debate, and consider what's resonated with you. Be sure to go to our Twitter at DebateMathPod to share your thoughts on this debate.
And I have to say a huge thanks to all 4 guests. You have strong opinions on this issue, but you were able to really talk about your thoughts and listen to each other. You modeled what good disagreement can be. You were thoughtful and respectful to each other. And I got to hear from everyone.
And thanks to those who are listening. We hope you enjoyed and learned from this episode.
As we wrap up, Sarah, where can listeners find you?
Oh, I am on Instagram and X at Sarah with an H Powell, Powell, PhD. And that's where I share all my grant work and all my research work. So I hope to follow you all as well.
And Jonathan?
I'm on X, Blue Sky, Mastodon, all those places at JRED530.
Liesl, where can listeners find you?
You can find me on most social media platforms at Liesl McConchy. You can check the show notes for the spelling. Liesl is Liesl. Or my website, lieslmcconchy.com. Lots of wonderful resources for teachers over there.
And Shelley.
You can find me on Twitter or X at Shelley M, as in Monica Jones 1. And you can look at the Benjamin Banneker website as well. Love for you to join the Benjamin Banneker and learn about culturally relevant math tasks and how to do that as well. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but that is something that I'm very passionate about.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Want to learn more about incorporating debate activities into your math classroom? Go to luzniak.com/podcast to sign up for my mailing list and get your first set of example debate activities you could use with your students today. Go to luzniak.com/podcast.
Don't forget to reach out to us with comments and questions on debatemath.com, or follow us on Twitter at DebateMathPod, and follow along with hashtag DebateMathPod.
Rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts.
Or wherever you listen to this podcast. Your feedback is super important to us.
Well, that's all from us.
Looking forward to debating with you more next episode. Until next time, cheers.